right, well, let's hit the road. We're
Well,
already,
before we start, let's just check in. Heather, are you all set to live stream?
Yes, we're live streaming now.
Thank you.
good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee meeting. The first order of business we have is for an executive session for the first half hour. And under 1 MRSA section 405(6)(c) to discuss the conditions, acquisition, or disposition of real property or economic development if premature disclosure of this information would prejudice the competitive or bargaining position of the humane system. And can we have a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
And Ellen, would you call the roll, please?
Certainly. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Trustee Kane,
Yes.
Trustee Doak,
Yes.
Trustee Donnelly,
Yes.
Trustee Irwin,
Yes.
Trustee Gardner,
Yes.
Trustee McMahon,
Yes.
Trustee Martin,
Yes.
Trustee Riley.
Yes.
The motion is carried.
Thank you, Ellen. And we'll now go into join the meeting. Morning, everyone, and thank you for your patience. The conversation went on a little longer than hoped, and I apologize for us showing up 15 minutes tardy. We'll try to move things along to make up some time and try to do it without squeezing David to see how fast he can talk again. So with that, I'd like to introduce the first item of the morning, the proposed changes to the Board of Trustee policy.
Trustee Donnelly,
Yep.
excuse me, sorry. We will have to take roll call for the public
Oh,
meeting.
sorry. Thank you, Ellen, for keeping me honest. Please take it away, Ellen.
Thank you. Trustee Kane,
Here.
Trustee Doak, I'll come back to him. Trustee Donnelly,
Here.
Trustee Irwin,
Here.
Trustee Gardner,
Here.
Trustee McMahon,
Here.
Trustee Martin,
Here.
Trustee Riley,
Here.
and Trustee Doak. He was with us. He must have stepped away. Okay, we're all set, Trustee Donnelly.
Thank you. So introducing the first item of board policy, trustee policy at 803, naming of physical facilities. And Trustee Gardner, would you walk us through this item?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Chair. This is here today at FFT committee for a vote to move it forward to the board. We have met a couple of times already and had discussions and shared what the work was done. Just as a quick reminder, this was a special committee formed back in September. The committee members were Trustee Kane, Professor Reardon, Ainsley Wallace, who is the president and CEO of USM Foundation, and myself and Ellen. We met, I think, 4 times, looked at the current policy, took into consideration many things about what could change and needed to change in the policy to take care of renaming of facilities and to upgrade the overall policy. You have seen this. I would open it up to any comments or any questions. Otherwise, I'd move it to a vote.
Are there any questions for Trustee Gardner? Let me read the text of the resolution. That the Board of Trustees accepts the recommendation of the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee and approves the proposed changes to the Board of Trustees policy 803, naming of physical facilities as presented. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Ellen, would you call the roll?
Certainly. Trustee Kane,
Yes.
Trustee Doak, Trustee Donnelly,
Yes.
Trustee Irwin,
Yes.
Trustee Gardner,
Yes.
Trustee McMahon,
Yes.
Trustee Martin,
Yes.
Trustee Riley.
Yes.
The motion is carried.
Thank you. Next item, tab 1, the Neville Hall renovations at University of Maine. And Stuart Harvey, Executive Director of Facilities and Capital Management Services, will walk us through this. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Donnelly. The request this morning is to receive approval to spend up to $1.5 million to renovate classrooms and associated systems in Neville Hall. Funding for this comes from the 2018 state bond and the allocation given to the University of Maine. The university intends to, or is planning to, construct this work over the next 2 summer construction seasons, starting this summer with the creation of an active learning classroom and some renewal to some toilet facilities and some breakout space in the hallways. Associated systems will be included in all of these renovations: HVAC, electrical, sprinklers, plumbing, IT, AV, for all of this work. And next summer's work will be additional classroom work on the 2nd and 3rd, 4th floors of Neville. So Neville is a building that was constructed in 1974, so a construction age of 47 years. It has not had a significant renovation since it was constructed, and you'll see in the sightlines presentation, I suspect you'll see in the sightlines presentation, their metric about the difference between construction and renovation age. Those are both the same for Neville Hall. It has a current net asset value of 50%, which is 1% lower than the University of Maine's average of 51%. So thank you, Chair Donnelly, and I'm prepared to answer any questions the committee may have.
Thank you, Stuart. And thanks for helping us catch up on time. That was concise. And any questions for Mr. Harvey?
Mr. Chairman, I have a couple of questions.
Yes, go ahead, Chair Irwin.
First, do we know when the renovations are done, do we have an estimate of what the net asset value of this building will improve to? Question one. Question two, am I right that part of the expense here is going to be ADA compliance, since this building was built almost 20 years before the ADA was enacted? And so I'm assuming that when it was constructed, it was not compliant, and is that part of the cost?
I'll answer this, your last question first. Yes, all of the work that we do now includes ADA compliance. So the bathroom work, the toiletry work will include making those bathrooms ADA compliant, which is an issue, to your point, in the existing bathrooms. Your first question, unfortunately, spending $1.5 million in Neville Hall won't make a significant difference to its net asset value. That it will probably impact, if at its best, 5,000 square feet of the 72,000 square feet that is Neville Hall. So unfortunately, it won't have a significant impact on that number.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Let me read the text of what the motion will be. That the Board of Trustees accepts the recommendation of the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee and authorizes the University of Maine system acting for the University of Maine to expend up to $1.5 million of state bond funds on Neville Hall renovations. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Helen, would you call the roll?
Certainly. Trustee Kane,
Yes.
Trustee Doak, Trustee Donnelly,
Yes.
Trustee Irwin,
Yes.
Trustee Gardner,
Yes.
Trustee McMahon,
Yes.
Trustee Martin,
Yes.
Trustee Riley.
Yes.
The motion is carried.
Thank you. Next item up, tab 2, approval of the FY 2020 Maine Economic Improvement Fund Annual Report. Presenting this today is President Joan Farini Mundy. President Mundy, Farini Mundy.
Thanks, Chair Donnelly. Good morning, everyone. I'll be doing this jointly with Vice President for Innovation and Economic Development, Jake Ward. And Jake is going to show the slides. We're very pleased to bring you the Maine Economic Improvement Fund Fiscal Year 2020 Annual Report. Just a very brief recap of MEIF and its meaning and its intention as a way of getting started. Jake, it worked for a second and now it's gone.
Sorry, I'm just got the, I opened the wrong,
Okay.
I opened Joanne's for president. There we go.
All
You see
right.
that now? Yeah,
Yep.
okay.
Great.
Yeah.
And okay, so here we have on the next slide the intention of MEIF, which it's an appropriated fund, basically to use research and development to solve problems for the state of Maine, fundamental problems. Jake, we can go to the next slide. By providing support, infrastructure, facilities, resources to the university systems, researchers and scientists and engineers and students intended to enable them to leverage those dollars with external grants and funding to get support for R&D activity in the 7 sectors, which we'll speak to briefly in the next slide, It's also very vital in helping the state of Maine attract and retain world-class researchers and people who will get interested in and work on the challenges that our state faces. And of course, creating new products, patents, technologies, companies, and so forth. So what this is a summary of the report that you have before you. It hits the highlights, the history of MEIF, and would like to recognize 3 of our board members who were vital participants in that in different ways. Trustee Donnelly, Trustee Kane, Trustee Michaud, all had a part in establishing this, which in a way, a very visionary kind of investment started by the legislature in 1997. It's an ongoing commitment among sectors. And here you see what the dollars, oh, okay. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah.
Yep. Here you see how the dollars have looked. In the math world, we'd call this a stepwise function. They've leveled off and then have been increased at different points in time over the course of the years. The funds have been level since fiscal 2016, and yet our system, researchers and scientists and engineers have been able to do a phenomenal amount with those dollars by way of leveraging them. Here you see how that is broken out. UMaine's percentage portion, the USM portion, there is a small appropriation that goes directly to the University of Maine at Machias for its partnership with the Down East Institute, and then a small campus initiative that is open to the rest of our campuses plus Maine Maritime Academy. And the 7 sectors that I mentioned, the work that gets funded here needs to fit in some way within at least one of these sectors. These were established in 1998, modified in 2000 to span the areas that the state has considered necessary in terms of economic growth and development, and also for sustaining our heritage industries. So you see these areas, and everything that's done in MEIF is connected in some way to one of these areas. It's about making opportunity for growth in the state of Maine. The Small Campus Initiative, started about 12 years ago by the system, was meant to ensure that these funds made their way to scientists and faculty and students at the smaller campuses of the system and to Maine Maritime. And so 3% in each fiscal year is allocated to those organizations. And this year, the process for calling for and selecting the winners, it will be managed through the Office of Research Development at the University of Maine with a group across the system and in engagement with Vice Chancellor Lowe's office. So we are very keen on making sure that these resources are spread out and are able to help us in the state of Maine. Next slide, please. Here are the winners of the Small Campus Initiative from fiscal 20. And you see Maine Maritime Academy, University of Maine at Farmington, and University of Maine at Fort Kent represented here with great work. And you read these titles and you can see that those are activities that not only will help to advance what we're doing in the state to try to create economic prosperity, to try to engage students in areas where they may then find employment and be able to be leaders. But at the same time, this is in a sense can be thought of as seed funding to enable these researchers to then be more competitive for federal grants in these same fields. And a lot of that happens. And Jake's going to tell you a whole lot more about how that works. I'd also just add that the trustees funded, the support that the trustees provide for the Research Reinvestment Fund through the system is tied to this, in that we've been working very hard over the last couple of years to engage teams and collaborators from across the system in seeking those RRF funds, which very often are linked to what we have already been funding in MEIF. So in terms of the kind of framing that we use here, in addition to the 7 sectors, there are multiple sources for that. The board's declaration of strategic priorities about advancing the Maine economy and being relevant in our programming and in our research areas for the state. The R&D plan that we worked on a couple of years ago with the board, and then also other more specific guidance. But in particular, the idea is to strengthen our infrastructure, build up the capacity and actual work and activity within the University of Maine system and Maine Maritime Academy to advance the state's capability and capacity to move forward in these 7 sectors. And with that, I'm going to turn to Jake.
So thank you, Jake Ward, Vice President, Innovation Economic Development. I think President Farini Money did a great job setting it up. Again, we do this as an annual report, and so some of these metrics are things that we've been measuring for quite a while. We break them into these 4 categories in the report, a lot of detail in the report itself, but growing research capacity and activities, supporting new technology development, growing economic development partnerships with the private sector as well as the public sector, and then supporting R&D workforce development. The highlights are, the state appropriation is 17.35 million. And as you can see, we've leveraged that by an additional 92 million in federal and private sector grants and contracts, which gives us a 5.3 to 1 leverage. Especially important is that the faculty and students throughout the system are involved in all of this, and many of those external funds support their salaries and benefits, so that it is an addition. That 92 million is quite an addition to our overall workforce, ourselves, and our capacity. The grants provide literally millions of dollars in equipment and laboratory upgrades. In fact, I would say that 90% of the equipment coming out of our labs and upgrades are coming through these external resources. And then, of course, gives us capacity to work directly with private sector companies and businesses that we're working up with in the state of Maine. This past year, 327, and I put the asterisk just to note that we all went into shutdown in March because of the pandemic, and every lab and every facility that we had throughout the system shut right down, and companies shut right down. So we saw a decrease in activity over the end, but already this year we're seeing quite a recovery in activity increasing. So our first metric is to grow grants and contracts, and we saw a significant increase in external funds this last year, about 21%, growing 76 to 92 million. Generally speaking, those are federal grants and contracts, and the dollar value of the award in the year it's counted is the total amount, though many of those awards are spread out over multiple years, so the expenditures and activity is spread out over the years. We have a goal of at least 50% of the awards being in the 7 sectors, and as you can see, we've exceeded that with very much of the work being directly related to those sectors. This just gives you a breakdown, the FY 2020 detail compared to year over year, the last few years. And in particular, I do want to point out the 7 sectors. You see a variability year to year in each sector. And again, it's largely because a big award may come in one year and be spread out over 3. It's counted in that award year. There's also some variability in how we count it for different technology sectors, because many awards fit into multiple sectors, but the primary award might be aquaculture and marine one year, or composites or environmental in the following year. So it's really great to see so much of this activity be interdisciplinary, because nothing is a single discipline these days, but it does lead to some of the variability that we see there. Again, just reminding the leverage, the blue is the yearly appropriation, and as you can see, our external leverage has continued to grow over the last five years plus. Commercialization activity, this is also one of the things that we're tracking and trying to continue to grow and increase. We can see the year to year, we've been continued to apply for patents and receive patents and generate, put them into licensing agreements and trying to generate revenue. The revenue is a year-to-year variability again, because in many cases we'll get an upfront licensing fee, but it may take several years or quite a few years before the license actually has commercial sales and generates revenue. So if we see bumps in a given year, it's often that upfront licensing fee. This is just some selected patents that issued this year. I think they're pretty interesting. Our portfolio around offshore wind continues to grow, and largely because of the international filings that are related to US filings and where those are issuing. Our nanocellulose work, cellulose nanofibrils with the construction and forest product sector continues to be a strong portfolio with a variety of products that are now starting to see introduction into the marketplaces. Some very creative and interesting, our Center for Center for Community Inclusion and Disability Studies, has been really working on adaptive mobility devices and equipment. And we see here is a bike, a walking, running bike that was recently licensed to a Maine-based company starting to produce that. And then a really interesting one in the IT AI space is software to improve breast cancer detection. So essentially using some digital tools to really analyze mammograms and other digital information and really trying to detect things that actually be able to predict breast cancer years before it actually shows up. And this is some recent stuff, and there's just a tremendous amount of interest in this. Sorry. So one, Joan suggested I give a quick update on offshore wind because that's in the news a lot right now, and it is one of our larger projects. Last summer, we announced a partnership with the New England Aquaventus LLC as a developer partner. That's a joint venture between Diamond Offshore Wind, a division of Mitsubishi, and RWE Renewables, two very large renewable energy companies that have worldwide projects, including quite a bit in the United States. So NEAV is the new joint venture for them. They've agreed to invest $100 million to build and construct and operate the single turbine project at Monhegan. The target date for operation is 2023, but there's still a lot of permitting activity that has to happen in order to be in that time frame. That single turbine is a royalty-free license, but it is a critical path to proving the technology, improving the viability of not just the technology working at sea, but the manufacturability, the scalability, and the efforts to get to economic viability for the cost of electricity. NEAV is committed to some future projects as well. Recently, in the last 6 months, the governor announced the stepping stone of a research array that would be in the Gulf of Maine in federal waters through Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. And NEAV, the developer, and UMaine Technology is proposed to be the demonstration technology there. That moves up from a single turbine to 10 to 12. That could be in the 2025, 2027 timeframe. A lot of work to do to get there, but that would be the first royalty generating commercial activity for that project. NEAV also has a non-exclusive license to use it worldwide, and one of their partners, RWE, is right now evaluating floating technologies, this one, as well as others, where projects around the world where they can use it. And so our ultimate goal in the technology is not just to be able to use it in the Gulf of Maine, but really make it one of the premier floating technology choices around the world. And so the Monhegan project just is a very important proof of concept to show the techno-economic feasibility, and will then give it a great visibility to other markets in the Gulf of Maine, the Northeast, as well as the rest of the world. The metric 3 is business and industry contracts. Again, one of the things that's great about what MEIF and the system has done is investing in our talent, our innovation, and our infrastructure that gives us the capacity to work with companies to help them in their problem solving and help them, find them opportunities for the joint development and commercialization activity. Our revenues have continued to grow in the commercial interest, largely in part because some of our programs are getting more exposure at the national level through our partnerships with the federal government, DOE and DOD. So the more exposure, the more introductions you're getting to the partners, the other contractors. Again, the number of contracts went down while the dollar volume went up. The dollar volume in those cases were several large contracts with defense contractors who have main operations who are really stepping up and increasing the R&D activity, largely in the Department of Energy and Department of Defense. We do, a reminder that all of this is statewide. There are not just, activities and facilities, but a lot of our, what we call innovation projects are statewide. That means there's funded projects with companies in those, by those counties. And many of them are multi-year, in some cases, decades worth of ongoing work. And I would say that, to some extent it tracks the numbers track where the businesses are and the populations are. So not surprising to see some low numbers in some of the counties that have lower population and higher numbers in some of the areas that have higher density. But we do have projects going throughout the state on a regular basis. We work closely with the state agencies and programs like Maine Technology Institute to make sure that folks know how they can access and work with us. R&D workforce development, as many have seen and know over the last decade or so, there's been more and more call for higher skilled folks coming into facilities. If facilities and companies are going to be doing innovation, they are looking for people who have that experience, that both the hands-on skill as well as the education and degree. We have several programs that put interns into these types of programs. And so we've been tracking and watching how our federal grant and contract activity supports the workforce, but also provides the skills and training. Just some numbers, generally speaking, we may use some MEIF to pay the wages of some faculty and staff and students, but they're often part of a larger project that's externally funded. So as you can see, we increase the number of employees, if you will, that are funded on external dollars and are directly doing work on these project areas. In addition, a lot of the grants and contracts provide other types of support to students, whether it's wages, tuition, fellowships, and even the graduate students are being paid their health insurance. So it ends up to be a significant number of dollars and resources that are directly supporting the students in their roles, as well as giving them the direct and hands-on experience in working on these types of projects. Again, just the trend has been good, and there is a focus and intention of getting PIs and project leaders to make sure there's support for students. And I think that this is a great platform where the HAF Transform helps take it to the next level. There's so much existing activity that can be built on. So I'm going to turn it back over to Joan for where we continue to go forward.
So we continue to look at these objectives, to refine them, to add more detail to the near-term and long-term objectives, trying to stay in tune with where the state is going and with what the system's goals are. But we continue to remain committed to this notion of attracting top talent and financial resources to the state of Maine, because that will help increase the state's R&D capacity, and also through our workforce development particularly, we're able to help to supply the workforce, the talent that can be available to that kind of incoming industry into the state. And so that's about the current and future workforce needs of the state. Conversations underway with multiple organizations, companies through the state, to be sure that we're clear on what their needs are and how we learn about that, and then how our programs can actually infuse experience in those areas so that students are employable not only at entry levels, but ultimately as leaders and innovators in those sectors, and then continue to elevate the R&D activities across the system to be sure that Maine is well understood as a place that has that ecosystem in place and can support incoming industry. And as Jake mentions, there's a lot out there that is kind of swirling and informing what we do with MEIF, and we constantly, all of us I know, watch these kinds of reports, the indicators that we see, and look to see how these state resources can help to amplify important areas for the state. Going forward and wrapping up as well here with this agenda item, we really want to remind everybody that MEIF is about supporting research that matters to the state of Maine and being able to make the case that we actually do that. So we are looking to increase our focus on what we learned about through the pandemic, which is our capacity already to respond rapidly to solving Maine's challenges as they come up in particular contexts, and also to build from what happened through the pandemic and work as a key role, play a key role in the pandemic recovery for the state. Use the University of Maine systems, talent, innovation, and infrastructure assets as a springboard for recovery and growth, particularly at the research university. Continuing to stay very focused on the heritage industries in the state. And it's an original goal of MEIF to work on those industries, but also to be sure that we're keeping abreast of and actually driving innovation for the next iterations of those industries going into the future. And then a constant focus on the partnerships with the private sector, with business, industry, and government to support the economic priorities. With that, you have the full report in front of you. I know it's been read closely by several of you because we've had a few comments about things we need to adjust in the final, and we appreciate that very much, but open to questions or comments.
Trustee Donnelly, you're muted.
Well, I said some very nice things about Jake and Joan, but thank you, President Farini-Mundy and Jake and Mr. Ward for your excellent presentation. I see Trustee Riley has a question.
I have a question and a comment. First of all, I loved reading this. It was very exciting. And I think the notion that we've leveraged to $92 million is very impressive. And I think I would love to see a one-page talking point of plain language that we as trustees could use to talk about this. I still remember a one-pager we got from the Alumni Association 1,000 years ago that talked about the engineers who built the Grand Coulee Dam. And I still remember, sort of bullets about how this research, be it the new potatoes in a roostick or the blueberry wound healing stuff, the kinds of stuff that everyday folks would understand about the implications of this would be terrific, because it's very, very impressive work. I just had a quick question. You speak to sponsored programs grew at 3%. What's the end? How does that compare? Is that where we want to be? What kind of growth would we want to achieve in grants and contracts?
That's a great question, and I think it's something that we need to look at the reset right now. That 3% year-over-year growth was in part informed back in 2013, but it was also looking at where the state's growth in GDP and things like that were. So I think what we've shown, and a lot of this directly relates to the economy, right? So if I go back 10 years, you can see it dive down and then come back up. So we want to be pragmatic, and we also want to grow within our means, right? So part of growing this also means, and we'll get to this it's actually a good tee into the rolling master plan conversation, right? Because if you grow this, you need to grow workforce, you need to grow facilities, and how do you balance that with the overall sustainability and operation of the institution and the system? So I think it's good to have a growth goal that is more aggressive than 3%, but I couldn't say today that it's 10, 12, 14, 16, whatever.
President Farini-Mundy.
I would just add that within that, Jake has already mentioned a couple of key factors, but because we're a university, the graduate education component and the undergraduate education component of what we do with growth and how we foster growth has to be considered as well. One of our big foci here is to make sure that undergraduates, even in the earliest of their time here, get a chance to be a part of this research enterprise. And so if we're looking to grow it, it's what Jake said, but it's a little more focused on the educational piece as well.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Mr. Chair,
it's Trustee
I
Kane.
just wanted to say that I love this report. I look forward to it every time I read it. For the last 15 plus years that I have read this report, it's excellent, and it's an exciting reminder of the statewide impact that the university has through research that I think not enough people know about. It's one of those things where I always think I want to shout this from the rooftops and put it in my purse, which if I was traveling right now, I would do. So I appreciate it very much and appreciate the presentation this morning.
Thank you, Trustee Kane. And I'll join you in that. And thank you, President Farini-Mundy, for the shout out for those of us that had our fingers in, different parts of the success in this. And when you serve in the legislature, there are things you look back at and wish you could change. And there are things you look back at with beaming with pride that you had a small part in a great success. And in '97, where Maine was last in the country, and I think one spot behind Puerto Rico in our commitment to research and development. We've come a long way. And Jake Ward has had a big part in how we've done that. And I feel like the addition of President Farini Mundi has been the supercharge we needed to put into our R&D efforts across the state. And so I'm with Emily. I don't carry it in my purse and it doesn't fit in my pocket quite as well. And I also wanted to thank you for your main policy article that had a little discussion on it. Any other questions or comments? Jake?
Yeah, and I would just, I really want to echo, it is so great to sit and look at this screen and all the faces that have been involved from the very beginning. You know, again, Trustee Donnelly, Trustee Kane, Trustee Michoud was a big part of all of this. At the time, President Cummings was a big part of it. President White was a big part back in her days in the administration. So there's just so many people that have been so involved in this since day one, and it really has been a rewarding time to get to this far and continue to see that growth. So I appreciate all that.
And some of the people that are still in the legislature, like Mark Lawrence, was a huge backer of this. So I will read the motion that the Board of Trustees accepts the recommendation of the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee and approves the 2020 Maine Economic Improvement Fund Annual Report as presented. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Trustee Kane, seconded by Trustee Gardner. Oh, Trustee Gardner.
Yep.
And Ellen, would you call the roll?
Certainly. I'd just like to clarify that there is a statement before the resolution that Trustee Donnelly read, and it states that the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee forwards this item to the March 22nd, 2021 Board of Trustees meeting for approval of the resolution that he read. With that, Trustee King,
Yes.
Trustee Doak, Trustee Donnelly,
Yes.
Trustee Irwin,
Yes.
Trustee Gardner, Trustee McMahon,
Yes.
Trustee Martin,
Yes.
Trustee Riley,
Yes.
and Trustee Gardner.
Yes.
The motion is carried.
Thank you, Ellen. And thank you for reading what I thought I implied. But I'll make sure I read it on each one going forward. Next up, we have in tab 3, the interim financing resolution, and Vice President of Finance and our Controller, Tracy Elliott, will present it. Good morning, Tracy.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Donnelly. This item is an action item for interim financing, and you may recall back in January, I did give some highlights to the Finance Committee, but just a reminder, we engaged Public Financial Management, our university financial advisor, to assist with the request for proposal process, where we asked banks for interim debt financing options so that we could fund capital project cash flows. Your materials do include the PFM summary about the analysis and their recommendations. And this financing will allow us to minimize our capitalized interest during the construction phase of some projects we have currently and in the future as well. I would highlight that we were very pleased with the number and quality of all of the responses. There were 7 in total. Very happy to receive that many, and that they were very competitive. It was also clear that the better financing solution for our immediate needs is a funded loan rather than a line of credit. And we concluded that TD Bank's solution best meets our needs, providing flexibility at competitive rates. Recommended financing terms include a fixed rate loan, as I mentioned, given the historically low rate environment, using a taxable rate, which TD Bank quoted last week at less than 1/3 of a percent, 0.31%. Rather than the non-taxable solution, which would have only been 5 basis points less. The taxable rate solution avoids some legal costs that would have been required to perform the due diligence for a non-taxable solution, and also avoids post-issuance compliance risks that would have been associated with non-tax financing. We've continued to work with TD Bank since the RFP was received and since this agenda item was written, and now recommend a 14-month term, which they're offering at the same interest rate as the 12. It allows for flexibility of prepayment on or after the 12-month with no penalty. And the additional 2 months provides greater flexibility at no additional cost, obviously, other than the interest for the revenue bond timing, so that we can make sure we issue the bonds when we need it most for cash flow. We've also continued to refine our cash flows. And at this point, different than what we previously thought, we've feel that we need 37,067,000, and that estimate will continue to be revised if our facilities folks and others make modifications to the financing cash flow needs. We would be using the financing, we imagine right now at this point, for just the Furland Engineering Education Design Center and USM's Portland Commons. But we would only be using the financing for any amounts already approved by the Board of Trustees. We expect to close the loan following the March Board of Trustees meeting, likely in April. And in the fall, we revisit this analysis and the cash flows and decide the best strategy for financing going forward. We'll then use long-term debt in the form of revenue bonds and pay off the outstanding interim financing principal at that time. And for future construction projects, we will likely, if this is successful, imagining that the interest rate environment hopefully will stay, relatively low for the foreseeable future, that this would be a good solution going forward as well. In summary, the terms are a fixed rate loan, not a line of credit, set at closing for up to 14 months with no prepayment prior to 12 months, with interest due monthly, and with an estimated legal cost for bank counsel capped at $50,000. Security is general obligation of the university payable from available revenues, with financial covenants mirroring existing covenants of UMS public debt. And that pretty much sums up the highlights of the interim financing, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Tracy. Are there any questions for Vice President Elliott? Seeing none, I'll read the text of the resolution that the Finance Facilities Technology Committee approve the following resolution to be forwarded to the consent agenda for the Board of Trustees approval at the March 22nd, 2021 board meeting. That the Board of Trustees accepts the recommendation of the Finance Facilities and Technology Committee and authorizes the University of Maine System to finalize the negotiations with and to execute a loan agreement with TD Bank for a short-term capital finance needs. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Trustee Kane, seconded by
Second.
Trustee Martin. And Ellen, would you call the roll?
Trustee Kane,
Yes.
Trustee Doak, Trustee Donnelly,
Yes.
Trustee Irwin,
Yes.
Trustee Gardner,
Yes.
Trustee McMahon,
Yes.
Trustee Martin,
Yes.
Trustee Riley.
Yes.
The motion is carried.
Thank you, Ellen. Next up, tab 4, the financing project resolution, the UMaine Furland Engineering Education and Design Center, again presented by Vice President of Finance and Controller Tracy Elliott. Tracy, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much. And this item also will be forwarded to the Board of Trustees consent agenda and is for the issuance of revenue bonds with a total not to exceed $45 million for the EDC at the Orono campus. The amount includes any capitalized interest, reserves, and costs of issuance, and allows for some fluctuation in interest rates. The resolution complies with Treasury regulations for tax-exempt bonding and allows also for the interim financing prior to the issuance of the long-term debt that we just talked about. The resolution further allows the university to reimburse for any university funds used for qualifying expenditures incurred within 60 days prior to the approval of the resolution by the board. We anticipate the revenue bonding likely to occur next spring, and the university's total outstanding debt is approximately $120 million as of March 1st. And with the issuance will remain below the statutory ceiling for the university of $350 million. And I'm happy to take any questions on that before you ask before the vote.
Thank you, Tracy. Are there any questions?
Can I, Jim, sorry, Mr. Chair?
Trustee Riley, sure.
Just from our USM experience, I'm just curious, the board, this is a $72 million project, but the total final project is projected to be 78 to 80. And where do those revenues come to complete the project?
Yes, thank you. Other revenues were from a significant gift and contributions, as well as the state of Maine general obligation bond commitment to the university.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Trustee Riley and Vice President Elliott. Any other questions? Seeing none, I'll read the text of the resolution. That the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee approves the following resolution to be forwarded to the consent agenda for the Board of Trustee approval at March 22nd, 2021 board meeting. The resolution that the Board of Trustees accepts the recommendation of the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee and approves the Finance and Project Authorization Resolution for the University of Maine Ferland Engineering, Education, and Design Center project on the Orono campus with a maximum principal amount of debt of $45 million. Can I have that motion?
So moved.
Moved by Trustee Gardner, seconded by
Second.
Ellen. I'll let you call that. It looked like a tie to me.
Thank you. By Jim Irwin. The
Okay.
roll call for the vote.
Thank
Trustee-
you.
Yes.
Trustee Doak. Trustee Donnelly.
Yes.
Trustee Irwin.
Yes.
Trustee Gardner.
Yes.
Trustee McMahon.
Yes.
Trustee Martin.
Yes.
Trustee Riley.
Yes.
The motion is carried.
Thank you, Ellen. Next up, tab 5, the rolling master plan for University of Maine, and President Joan Farini Mundy will present.
Thank you, Trustee Donnelly. This is an update for the trustees for the FFT to keep you well informed and well apprised of our planning processes here at the University of Maine. I think necessitated in many ways by a combination of factors, the growth in research, but particularly the growth in the Advanced Structures and Composites Center. The fact that the Alfond Foundation gift includes potential renovation of facilities here on the University of Maine campus, and a variety of other factors. So the concept here that I am most intrigued by is the fact that this is a rolling capital master plan, something new for the university, and we wanted to introduce you to what it is. So next slide, please, Joanne. I'd like to introduce the people who will be a part of this conversation. The co-chairs of our space committee, Jake Ward, you've just met, Vice President for Innovation and Economic Development, and Joanne Yastrzemski, our interim Vice President for Finance and Administration and CBO. As well as Jake and Joanne, we'll hear this morning from the Executive Director of Facilities, Stuart Harvey, and then our wonderful planning consultant and facilitator, Deb Poudry, who is here with us on the line as well. This committee has been meeting bi-weekly in the past several weeks to help us have aspirational plans really for the future expansion and growth in some of the capabilities of our university and also in our space footprint. So we're very well advised also by Carolyn McDonough, Director of Capital Planning. So next slide, please. It is a special point in time for the university with many dynamics. I've already mentioned a little bit of this. There is an increase in demand for major facilities projects, which of course must be balanced with a lot of contextual factors. Therefore, the need for much more disciplined planning here and for more careful ongoing examination of where we are. We must balance our space reduction along with space addition and modernization. So we have reinvigorated our efforts to engage in space reduction. There are, as you've heard a little bit already, continued emerging opportunities in research and economic engagement, some of which requires specialized space, specialized instruments that need to be housed in specialized space. And we are hopeful, as everyone is, about post-pandemic renewal. Unified accreditation is a part of who we are, and therefore it needs to be considered as we move in our planning and our space work, and also the Alfond investment. So this next slide just kind of reiterates that we are influenced by many factors, but I wish to point out in the bottom left corner, the blue document, that's the last capital master plan that the University of Maine has had, completed in 2008 by Sasaki, a very nice plan and document, but we are now back in the game of re-examining our planning and putting it in place in a way that's rolling. Again, looking at areas of growth perhaps for the university, particularly in with our partners at the University of Southern Maine and beyond in the university's engineering areas, we do see the potential for growth. Computing is another area, and of course the particular precursors to the Maine Business School and others are potentials for us. But we're watching the state economic conditions, the projections for where there might be best growth and where the governor is focusing on economic recovery. The Energy and Climate Action Plan, for example, offers a number of opportunities where UMaine has great strength, not only in the Climate Change Institute, but a variety of research centers across the institution that are a part of, even in terms of the societal impacts and coastal community kinds of studies that we can contribute to. So that all together with our aging physical plant and this cyclical need for reduction of space, modernization and expansion is what's driving us to have this activity underway. The next slide does talk about our sort of aspirations. We do hope to see growth, or we need to plan for the potential of growth, I guess would be the way to say this. And the facilities would need to grow and accommodate that change if it becomes possible, and if it is what works over time. Even in the areas of instruction, the traditional spaces do not accommodate contemporary practice. And although we're doing a great job, I think, system-wide to upgrade classrooms and make them more amenable to distance learning and other kinds of remote technologies, we have more to do here. Graduate students enrollments are growing at the University of Maine, and we see that as an important function for us and for the state. And then we'll need to continue to focus on how we'll replace and how we'll modernize. So next slide. And some of you have seen this too. Our external funding is continuing at a very strong pace, even through the pandemic. And so the most exciting figure on this slide for me is the increase in R&D expenditures over 19, where you see we're up to 165.1 million. And that requires a physical plant that can support that work. Next slide, please. As we move toward R1, we need to be continually focused on what the facilities need to be, and overall managing a footprint that is right-sized to this university, but at the same time anticipates where there would be opportunities for growth, even with federal funding patterns, something that we're watching very closely. And now I will introduce Deb Poudry, who is going to talk to us about the concept of a rolling capital plan, and I'm very grateful to her for her help in guiding us into doing this work at UMaine. So Deb. You may be on mute, Deb.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Well, there's a ton of work to do, and the way to move forward with this is really a rolling master plan. Traditional master plans give you an analysis, a map, a report, and unfortunately, too often they end up on the shelf, and when conditions change, you have to go through that whole process again. So in this circumstance, a rolling plan that goes on and makes those adjustments is a better process. It operates within the overall strategic framework of the university, and it incorporates the many initiatives that are ongoing and the evolving circumstances with funding and on campus. The other thing is it's really a statewide process. this very rough diagram just gives you a sense of some of the facilities that may have some sort of engagement with the capital program. So I think the other element to this that is that the Space Committee itself has a significant role in terms of advising Executive Cabinet. As these move forward, there are more things to think about. Next. So the elements of the plan are these. On the left in the dark box is the planning activities that take place and sort of what our objectives are. That process stuff iterates with a whole series of projects, which we've clustered in 4 groups. The major capital projects are the big buildings, things like Furland. Space management, property disposition, that is really an analysis and process that continues to keep track of what space is available against what space is needed and allows that to be managed in a consistent and flowing way, because you'll need interim space as well as final space. Partnerships in real estate allow you to do things that you might not, do in a normal process. So that's a good resource. And then stewardship is really the broad picture of where the campus's capital resources are in the long run. It's made up of a whole series of projects, many of them smaller. Annual call projects are things like office renovations or classroom updates. These tend to go on. Preventive maintenance and deferred maintenance both address the asset value overall, and you'll hear more about that later in this presentation, later today, I think. And then there are ongoing updates as a flowing process, it's more important to get this information out there. So these things work together, and that's the essence of the plan. Next. A couple of additional points. Facilities are not very flexible. Once you put them in, you've got them for a long period of time. And right now there are some unusual unknowns. Post-COVID, space will probably be used in different ways than it is now, so that the measures and metrics that people use for space planning probably will need adjustment. Climate shift, we don't know yet how much impact that's going to have, but these things need to be taken into consideration. The second issue is that delivering facilities takes time. Major projects typically take about 5 years apiece. When you do a whole series of them, as well as all these other efforts, you need to expect a sort of bulge, a 10-year bulge in spending and in your ability to deliver, your resources to deliver the projects. That doesn't last forever. It comes back down, but you do need to be prepared for it. The third and perhaps obvious point is that there is never enough money or time to deliver everything that is justifiable for the university. So balancing your long-term goals and your obligations with your resources and the choices you make on specific activities is really essential to go through this kind of process and achieve it with a good outcome that you'll look back at positively. So that is the 30-second special. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Stuart to continue.
Thank you, Deb. This slide identifies the first of several major capital projects that we're going to talk about in this presentation. The narrative on the right-hand side was part of a slide that the committee saw when the university gave an update to the UMEC project at the last FFT committee meeting. But the UMEC project is a mission-critical infrastructure project, but it also is a tool that the university will use in pursuit of its climate challenges, in pursuit of our climate plan. And it's also a part of our support of initiatives such as the one from the state of Maine, Maine Won't Wait 4-year capital action plan that was put together by the state back in December of 2020. So next slide. So this slide sort of identifies the key role that space management plays in the Space Committee's work inside of the UMaine Capital Master Plan, Rolling Capital Master Plan. balancing the amount of our space, the type of our space, the use of our space, the age of our space is really an ongoing and critical piece of work in order for us to stay competitive. There's just, it's hard, it would be hard to explain in this how much work that actually is. You know, office moves and lab and classroom renewal, adapting space, existing space, and as Deb identified, our space is here for a long time, so we've got, and from our metrics from Gordian, we see, you know, the age of our space, and adapting that for new uses is something that you have to really be strategic about. So it's really a significant amount of work, and then there's the stewardship around the preventative maintenance programs that we need to keep our facilities operating in pursuit of our R1 status and all of the research that we are expecting that we will undertake. Deferred maintenance is a big issue for all of our campuses. The graphic on the right there from Gordian is one that's in the package for their presentation later in this meeting, but it identifies, you know, our asset reinvestment needs over the next 10 years, and as you can see, it's a big number. So next slide. This slide digs a little bit deeper into the components of space management. You know, there has to be conversations around space reduction, which we're having and we're working on, coordination in the rolling plan about funding, where capital projects fit, the annual call that Deb mentioned earlier, and its role in managing that ongoing lab and classroom renovation work that helps our colleges and departments stay competitive. And then again, just downsizing and trying to modernize and direct our space removal. The graphic on the right, again, another one from Gordian. This is a little bit of about the keep up part of the metrics that Gordian uses to help benchmark us. That's also in their presentation for later on. Next slide. I think, Jake, you're next.
Thank you, Stuart. So one of the aspects that we've wanted to make sure we gave you a quick informational update is the reutilization of some historic buildings through the P3, the public-private partnership process. We've given a couple information items over the last 6-7 months. And so currently, again, this is a reutilization of Holmes Hall and Coburn Hall, two of the oldest buildings on the campus, part of our historic district. Quite expensive to rehab to be able to use them, and just not feasible for us to use our internal resources to do it. So the working with our consultants, Bradford and Dunleavy, developed a feasibility study of what the uses could be, went through an RFQ process in the fall that identified 4 developers who would qualify for the P3 process. They were invited to submit proposals to an RFP, which just came in a few weeks ago, and which we just started reviewing last week. Hopefully soon we're going to come to an answer on a developer to come forward to negotiate a contract with, and then bring it back to the Board of Trustees for final approval. And I would just say, you know, representing, and several of us are on this committee, very exciting proposals for reutilization. Feel very comfortable that we're going to work in a plan that makes a lot of sense to use other people's money to renovate these facilities and still have them be a key feature on the University of Maine campus.
This is just a reminder. You know about all of this, but it gives an indication of the different directions from which potential planning activities need to be undertaken. So the Furland Engineering Education and Design Center under construction now, and that had been a part of early planning in that previous report. The energy replacement plant, the UMEC project, you know, is in the design phase right now and is going to be vital for many reasons for our campus going forward. The life sciences building had been, again, something outlined in the early plans, and that still is under discussion in a serious way here. In a very different way, though, the GEM opportunity, the factory of the future that Habib has described to you, to some of you. That has come about because of opportunities and federal funding and external occasions that we may wish to take advantage of. Similarly, some renovation in our aquaculture area coming about as quite needed as the state is working to expand its capacity and capabilities to support that growth, industry growth in that area. And then the Alfond grant, which has in it some items that align well with a longstanding engineering phase 3 master plan that has been in place for some time here for renovations of these very old buildings. And then the athletics phase 1 master plan that the Alfond work has precipitated. So there is a lot happening, and I'm very optimistic that having this now kind of coordinated through a rolling master plan will help us be more disciplined and more systematic going forward on these fronts. Next slide, please. The University of Maine has had an engineering phase 3 master plan for some time now. Prior to the building of the Ferland Center, there had been a longer term look at what would be needed for engineering, and then in the Alfond Award, to advance the Maine College of Engineering, Computing, and Information Science, which is a statewide entity. There is the inclusion of some facilities renovation at the University of Maine. And of course, we are in partnership with the University of Southern Maine as that planning begins to take shape. The next phases for engineering in the next slide include this notion of growing our numbers statewide, because we need to meet the needs across the state. So you see here a bit of data that perhaps you've seen before. As we think about the growth at the University of Maine and at other University of Maine system engineering and computing programs, we need to be thinking about what facilities are necessary to support that growth. We're interested in continuing to build programs and attract talent for the state system-wide. And we just share a bit of enrollment about the University of Maine College of Engineering so that you can see that there has been growth. And very much that's in response to state need to replenish the engineering workforce as it begins to reach retirement age, and also as new infrastructure needs emerge in the state, and the need for engineers and increasingly now computing professionals will continue. And so this is part of what has been an ongoing conversation at UMaine that now will be merged into a broader conversation. Next slide, please. And this is a kind of schematic of the planning that has been underway at UMaine for some time, where you see a sense of ideas for what might go forward into the future. And that now becomes something we roll into this rolling master plan discussion. I'll turn to Stuart to see if he wishes to comment on this slide, and I think he has the next one.
Yeah, no, this is just that, a graphic of the engineering college buildings here on the campus, and broken out by research and development and more academic focused. You can see from it's something that we worked on early on. You see the machine tool lab is still there, and the note that it's been replaced by the Ferland EDC Center. So it's just to sort of give you all a little idea about the number of buildings that are inside of the engineering college itself.
And to make the point that we now put it together with research and development much more intentionally, so that you can see the need for essentially a district that is focused on engineering on the campus. Next slide, please. Just briefly on athletics, everyone has heard a lot about this, the Alfond commitment for up to 90 million to support athletics facilities. We can go to the next slide and show you the specifics. And we're happy to go into much more detail on this, but you see the list here of what's intended and what will be possible with that investment together with the match, including improvements to the arena and expansion of the Sean Walsh Center, new football operations center, a new strength and conditioning and sports medicine spaces for football and basketball. And throughout this, we see the commitment, of course, to gender equity. Next slide, please. Stuart also will do this one.
Yes, thank you.
Can I show you where parking lots are and things?
What you see here is a graphical depiction of the narrative from the earlier slide. I'm just going to go through this apologize. I'll probably do it as if you know a little bit about where things are now. So I'll try not to do that too much, but starting upper center, new location for our softball field. Right of that is new location for our field hockey field. Right of that is a new location for our soccer field. Heading down the page, you'll cross over some new roadways and access points with some additions of parking for these venues and for the campus, and across that all the way to additional parking behind our tennis complex. Coming down, you see the new speed dome with an indoor track and not quite full-size football field. So it'll omit the end zone on one end, right? So it'll be a full-size football field minus the end zone on one end. Coming down a little bit further is the replacement of the Mahaney Dome that intended to tie into the Memorial Gym and create better access to the use of facilities inside the gym. There are upgrades inside of the Memorial Gym, as President Farini Mundy mentioned, to improve gender equity. Also, moving a little bit further left, you see the multi-purpose center, new basketball arena to bring basketball back to the University of Maine, and just offices, I think, for athletics and other things that will be located within this multi-purpose space. And then finishing with over to the left, below the Alfond Arena, a renewal of the Sean Welsh Hockey Center, which I think is the next slide on this presentation. Yeah, so
early renderings to give you a feel for what this very preliminary work is looking like. And of course, we will be having much more interaction with all of you as this project proceeds. Joanne is next.
Thank you. So I'm going to wrap up with an overview of the magnitude of the spending, this 10-year capital plan, and talk about the possible feasible sources of funding for this 10-year master plan. So I'm going to just frame this slide for a minute and let you absorb all these numbers. So this master plan has a magnitude of in the $700 to $900 million range over the next 10 years, as you see here. And the Furland is already, as we talked about, far underway and funding determined, including the bonding that Tracy talked about earlier today. The UMaine Energy Center, why that's into a continued conceptual and design phase to determine how much we really need that new power plant and other energy projects, and why when we determine that amount, it will be based upon the energy savings that will be therefore used to pay for whatever the debt amount is that we really need to borrow. I do want to just go back to the Furland for a minute. This $45 million is going to be, the debt service is going to be funded by the state for that. So funding for the state for this debt service, funding from energy savings for the $130 million debt service. The rest of the slide, the rest of the projects, why we thought about what it is that is feasible for possible state funding, revenue bond funding, I'll comment on that again in a minute, the Alfond grants themselves, which is firm, and the match for the Alfond grants in the form of fundraising, particularly with the efforts from the UMaine Foundation. And then we have a placeholder here for the P3 in that range. That's a little high, but it's a 10-year time frame, so we'll probably have more than P3s than what we have before you today. Then we have our own operating funds, and this gets to the point of the stewardship and the deferred maintenance, and something we're hoping in the $150 million range over this decade, a lot coming from operating funds where we want to get to a point where we can fully fund depreciation, and how to get that up to the keep up numbers that the Gordian slide showed earlier today. just going to pause for a minute, let you see this slide, but then just say one more comment about debt. So University of Maine has a very low debt level right now with only $6.5 million a year in debt service. So there is debt capacity for this university. And I know that this 300 million seems like a large number, and it uses a big chunk of what it is that we have for a debt cap, but this is over a 10-year period. But we do have a capacity, if you calculate it in the form of debt service coverage ratio, which is in the 3.3 times range, or if you look at it as a percentage of what we have for debt capacity in other ways as well, including the viability ratio that we often show the board. So these funding amounts on this slide are feasible. We need to work hard to get here, but we wanted to give you a picture of what is possible, what is feasible in our hopes and our dreams. The next slide just comments on chunks of cash flow, sort of in the middle of this decade where you see the most of that cash flow going out the door. And I just want to reference a team that Ryan Lowe, Vice Chancellor Ryan Lowe, has put together, look at a definitive cash flow schedule for most all of these projects that are in planning. And of course, Ryan, you can comment on that. But this is a conceptual diagram at this point for this 10-year cash flow big picture. So with that, I'm going to wrap up with a thank you from the team that presented today. And I know Joan feels the same way. And we're so pleased to be able to have this opportunity to show you this rolling master plan today. Questions?
Thank you to the team for this comprehensive walkthrough of the rolling master plan. Are there any questions?
Here.
Trustee Gardner.
Not really a question, but just a comment. And I think that the plan that was shared and the information and the layout of the information was outstanding. It is exactly what I guess I had been kind of looking for quite a long time in terms of a rolling plan, and one that showed what the possibilities were against the backdrop of the mission and the objectives of the University of Maine. And I thought it was very well put together. So thank you for doing that.
Welcome.
Thank you, Trustee Gardner. Trustee Kane.
Thank you very much. It was an excellent presentation and certainly covers the big highlights of initiatives that are grounded in the research conversation that we just had actually around MEIF. The area that I am drawn to want to know more about, probably for a future meeting, is that line on the spending plan slide, that's stewardship, deferred maintenance, because there are sort of two, as I think about the campus, 2 to 3 main categories that do not show up here. One is residence halls. Another is arts facilities, which would include the 44 Hall as well as the Collins Center, and then, and I assume the museums. And then the third is the non-engineering academic buildings. Living here, I probably have a better sense of these buildings than a lot of others, but I assume all of those fall under the stewardship and deferred maintenance, but it would be good to have a better sense of what's embedded in those numbers. Again, the rest of it is outstanding and stunning and wonderful. I just would like to have a better understanding about the other side of the less sexy, let's call it the less sexy side of facilities. But my personal favorite, which is the stewardship and deferred maintenance.
Thanks, Trustee Kane. Absolutely. And we'll that'll be in future presentations for sure. I will point out that several of these engineering buildings that you see in the engineering district are used widely across the campus for classes well beyond engineering, but that doesn't address your point. And I hear that, and we'll more to come.
Trustee Kane, I'd just like to say one thing about that chunk of infrastructure and deferred maintenance. That really looks at the whole institution. When we look at fully funding depreciation, it looks at the whole institution. So that would include residential halls as well.
Thank you. And great question, Trustee Kane. But this may be the first trustee meeting where we have the arts being less sexy than the engineering. But I appreciate the comment and the insights. Your proximity to these buildings gives you the best insight from probably the Board of Trustees level. So thank you.
I love them all very, very much. So I truly love them all. So that's why I care about that maintenance part, especially.
Trustee Doak.
Thank you, Chair. Just a thought I had, and this might have been covered. I'm sorry if it was, but when we look at these new facilities in the athletic realm, Maine Hockey has always had like a home away from home with the Cumberland County Civic Center. Often when I first saw this presentation, I was just blown away by it because it's just something that's needed in Division I. But could other campuses in the University of Maine system host a home game on the soccer facility, on the new basketball arena, and just so we all of our campuses could benefit from some of this generous stuff that was made, and you know, maybe the other schools will say, no way, we want to be home, but it'd be nice to be able to open that up to other athletic teams within the University of Maine system. So just
Trustee Doak, if I could comment on that. President Rice and I had that conversation a few weeks ago and have introduced that into the conversations and the planning with the teams here. And there will be parts of that process that fully reach out across the system to athletic directors at all of the other institutions and to presidents. So a live conversation, and I think a great point to bring up.
Okay, thank you. Good work.
Any other questions, comments? I'll just once again, thank the team for a very good walkthrough on the big picture, and it makes it a little easier for me, for one, on looking at the comprehensive piece, and then each piece that we look at individually makes more sense. So thank you, is very, very helpful for me. Next item on the agenda is tab 6, capital projects status report and bond projects update at UMS. And Carolyn McDonough, Director of Capital Planning and Project Management, will present. Good morning, Carolyn.
Good morning, Chair Donnelly. Thank you. So yes, the capital planning, capital project and bond project status report is in front of you. Highlights from the report. This time around, we're at 18 capital projects as we removed 3 last round. I'll note that while the number of projects is declining or has declined over the last few meetings, the value of expenditure levels obviously increasing greatly. And if you look at the graphs, you can see that noting that the Residence Hall and SSC project from USM are not yet reflected fully in the value on those graphs. We might have to adjust the scale moving forward, but very exciting. The pandemic impacts do continue on our projects. I had outlined those over the past year. Not a lot of change there, but the good news is it has not had a major impact on the amount of construction we're doing. We're moving right along and keeping quite busy. Regarding the bond project status report, we're showing 35 projects now. 11 of those are also reflected in the capital project report, and 5 of those will eventually also be on the capital project report. In fact, Neville Hall is one of those which was brought forward today, so make that 4. And 12 of the projects are complete. We're keeping all of the projects on the list so that we're capturing the full $49 million bond. Of the $49 million, we're currently reflecting about 39 in projects underway, and the total value across all those projects of 60 million. So again, showing some of the match that's going along with those. Other updates on the report include just a brief mention of the Harold Alfond Foundation grant and related projects. Heard a lot about them today and over the last few months, but many construction and or renovation projects are going to come forward as a result of that. And the Vice Chancellor Loa has put together a group of financial and capital planning folks. I think Joanne mentioned earlier that we're working together on rolling out the management of those projects, and we'll make sure that those are aligned with the 3-tiered capital planning process, the 1, 5, and 10, and of course master plans of the campuses. And you'll begin to see RFQs emerging as UMaine just brought forward the information items on their athletics and phase 3 engineering projects. So you'll see some movement starting to happen on those projects, and we'll be bringing forward more information as we get moving. The other updates on there include the UMaine Historic P3, which Jake also mentioned in the UMaine Rolling Master Plan. The P3 projects at Maine Farmington and Presque Isle are also coming forward a little bit later, but those are continuing. So a lot of activity out there on those. And lastly, but not least, the Ferland Engineering Education and Design Center project, just an update, is continuing, moving along on schedule. We did have a beam topping ceremony back in February 12th. That was very exciting. And hopefully some of you or all of you were able to attend and virtually see that happening, but all is going well. So any questions?
Thank you, Director McDonough. Are there any questions for Carolyn? Hearing none. Thank you very much. Next item up is tab 7, Sightlines Annual Report. And that will be presented by Chief General Services Officer Chip Gavin. Good morning, Chip.
Morning, Mr. Chair. Nice to see everybody this morning. I will set the table in 2 parts for our colleagues from Sightlines. Emily Morris is with us this morning. Many of you have seen Emily in the past make similar presentations. Emily is a senior account manager with Gordian, formerly known as Sightlines, and Emily will be taking the floor with the chair's permission shortly. I want to also thank Carolyn McDonough for her work in shepherding this process with Emily this year. So a couple of quick things before we turn the floor over to Emily. First off, just want to ground the committee in what you're about to see. So the annual return on physical assets presentation that Gordian is about to show you, it's really a benchmarking exercise, best practice, if you will, to take that snapshot each year and measure ourselves not only against ourselves, frankly, over a period of time, see what's happening with our capital infrastructure as years go by, but also to be able to benchmark that against other higher ed systems, both public and private, and to keep track of where we stand next to the competition for this major both asset and cost for the university. So this is a presentation that many of you will be familiar with, and many of you that are not familiar with it yet will note as we go through it that slides may look familiar because a variety of similar slides from Gordian's work were embedded in the other presentations that you've already seen today, reflecting many of the ways in which we use the work that we partner with Gordian to do. The second piece that I'll mention to set the table is without stealing Gordian's thunder or their presentation, is that the theme this year, really 2 pieces I would mention. One, that the need for investment in our existing infrastructure certainly continues. The challenges of trying to get ahead of the needs, not outstripping our investments, continues, and Emily will share that data with you. And secondly, Sightlines Gordian does observe this year about some potential future impacts regarding the pandemic on the volume and nature of space that we would have. So just want to get ahead of that issue and mention to you that as part of the Capital Budget Advisory Team's work, which is a system-wide group of facilities directors, presidents, CBOs, and others chaired by Ryan, in which Carolyn and I and the budget office participate, as well as others, that exists at the direction of the Board of Trustees. And with the support of the board, that group is taking up the impact of the pandemic as a special focus of its work this year. And you should expect to hear more through Ryan or Carolyn and I in future meetings about what that advisory body has to say about the future impact of the pandemic on the volume and nature of our space. So with those brief introductory comments, Mr. Chair, with your permission, I would turn the presentation over to Emily.
Thank you, Chip. Morning, Emily.
Good morning. So I'll get started. Everyone's able to see my screen appropriately?
Yes.
Great. So thank you, Chip, for the introductions, and thank you to the committee for giving me the opportunity to share the executive highlights of this year's fiscal year 20 analysis. Each campus is assigned a dedicated team charged of collecting, qualifying, and presenting the campus specific analytics ahead of aggregating it up to the system level, which we're looking at today. Here we're going to do the high level overview specific mostly to the capital section, but there is a lot of information regarding operations that's included in the materials you have available. Just quickly, Gordian, formerly known as Sightlines, is an international facilities firm really focused on higher education, although we are expanding and currently doing work within healthcare, K-12, as well as state and local governments. And this year we are excited to add the Maine community colleges, Maine Maritime, as well as the state of Maine building and grounds facilities within our database. We have a robust membership that's continuing to expand of colleges, universities, and state systems. And really the focus is bridging the gap between facilities and finance through a common vocabulary, consistent methodology, and credibility through benchmarking. And it was really exciting when I joined to see some of the other presentations being done this morning and your ability to make those links as a group. We're going to go over the ROPA analysis, or the return on physical assets. Again, focusing on the portion on the left-hand side of your screen, the asset value change today, which is annual stewardship, or the recurring dollars available to keep up with life cycles as they're coming due. Most institutions are not financially able to keep up with those life cycles when they come due, or keep up with them, if you will. And so they're then deferred to a backlog of need on campus, which Gordian refers to as asset reinvestment need. And this is really the accumulation of that backlog over time that's then needed catch-up dollars to draw down on that. Every year, Sightlines collects a lot of data and links it to one of these 4 buckets. And collecting that data just allows us to understand the relationship between space, capital, and operations, and hopefully uncover opportunities to optimize resources. So with that, we're going to jump right into this data. Just findings from this year's analysis looking at square footage and density are similar to fiscal year 19. However, space is continuing to age, and over the next 10 years, dual waves of life cycles will be coming due at the same time and increasing the overall capital investment need. Looking at that capital investment into existing space to keep up with the life cycles is increasing in fiscal year 20 from fiscal year 19. However, it's not able to slow. It's not enough to slow that aging process of the system assets. Focusing on energy consumption, you can see the details within the full slide deck, but that's really decreased across the UMaine system as campuses shut down due to COVID-19. With those shutdowns, though, there was some cost savings, especially on the utility side. And then we're seeing service process improvements with the AIM system. And there continues to be opportunities that are all being worked on to really look at the ability to increase communication across the different customers at each of the campuses, as well as increase the reporting done through that system to ultimately drive more accurate data and then decisions. Throughout the presentation, I just want to note, given COVID, our database shuffled just a little bit. So we're really looking somewhat differently than past years at a peer average that consists of public higher ed institutions across the country. So several in New England, in the Northeast, but also other areas of the country are included as well. So here, just highlighting the 9 years of data over the UMaine system, looking at gross square footage, and it's really holding steady. Back in 2012, 8.8 million gross square feet. It's decreased since then, but very consistent over the last 3 years at 8.6 million gross square feet. In terms of student enrollment, we're looking at this trending since 2006 and the density of campuses. So density factor is really a measure of how busy space within the system is in relation to how busy the system is in relation to the physical space available across the UMaine system. This metric is important to understand because it's connected to both the complexities of running the day-to-day operations, but also more strategic campus utilization opportunities, which are discussed and should continue to be discussed because we're seeing and feel that the trends of the past are not going to be the same trends of the future regarding density. Here, just highlighting enrollment dipped slightly, ever so slightly within the UMaine system from fiscal year 19 to 20. And again, this is pre-COVID, so these numbers are fall 2019. But that's great considering the trend going back from 2006 that really has been trending downward. The fact that it's pretty much holding steady from fiscal year 19 to 20 is a great thing to highlight. This is that same view looking at the long-term density factor against the Board of Trustees interim and long-term goals. And just something to keep in mind here, both fiscal year 19 and 20, right at the interim goal, users per 100,000 gross square feet. But something to keep in mind is the birth rate trend that we've all been watching over the last couple of years. There's a decline which began around the Great Recession and it's continuing. If you think about 2025, the numbers of those traditionally aged students will continue to go downward. And that trend means that there's going to be, a smaller pool of available students for all the campuses and universities across the country. And so the flagship campuses, the elite privates, will continue to be able to fill all the slots available. But the other higher ed institutions are going to be fighting for a smaller pool of students moving forward for enrollments. So again, thinking about the interim goal being met currently, but the long-term goal being slightly higher, what does these birth rate trends mean moving forward for the UMaine system? Also, something to note is just the distribution of each of the UMaine campuses. They all have a different density, and this bell curve really highlights that. UMaine Machias has the lowest density of the campuses. UMaine Augusta has the highest on the far right of this trend. Again, trending for density, the utilization of space is a continuous conversation. What is the space management plan moving forward post-pandemic? What's kind of the new reality of some of these facilities and campuses as a whole should be a continued topic of conversation. Looking at the age of campus, this is looking at percent of total gross square foot broken down between age buckets under 10 years old, 10 to 25, 25 to 50, and over 50. And you can see from 2006 to 2020, the high risk space, that percent of space over 25 years old is increasing. And there's implications of that, both on the operational side, as well as capital risk. And so as the building ages, there's more operational demands and it's harder and potentially more reactive work from each of the facilities departments at the campuses. And then as a capital perspective, as buildings age, life cycles are coming due, and if the capital investment is not there to replace those life cycles, ultimately they could fail and have program displacement. Another important comparison, not just what's trending over time, but against peers. Excuse me. So this is looking at those same age buckets, under 10 years old, up through over 50 years old, against other public higher ed institutions. There's more space over 50 within the UMaine system and less space under 10 years old. For the UMaine system. This slide also shows the implications of capital needs as well as operations. Again, highlighting as the buildings are aging, there's going to be additional capital needs and potential more reactive maintenance going on. The younger the campus is, the younger the percent of space, really hoping for additional preventative and planned maintenance to protect and extend those life cycles. And then a just quick look moving forward, there's a great shift going on within the UMaine portfolio in terms of aging buildings at a threshold here where many buildings under 50 years old within the next 5 years will be shifting into that oldest age bucket of over 50. So for fiscal year 20, 53% of total space within the over 50 category. By 2025, that will increase to 60% of space. This does not include some of the projects that were being talked about this morning in terms of resetting the age of some of those buildings. But you can see regardless, looking at peers and higher ed public institutions, the UMaine system has a higher percentage of buildings over 50. Shifting a little bit to that capital investment, important to look at the total capital investment profile over time. And this is looking at that capital spend across the system broken down between existing space, new space investments, and then non-facilities type work. Fiscal year 20 saw an increase of total investment from fiscal year 19. On average, the spend is $44.2 million per year across the UMaine system. In fiscal year 20, that investment was below $40 million. So although an increase from fiscal year 19, fiscal year 20 was below that average. And so then looking at this against peers, we see that increase in investment for fiscal year 20, and then the gap between the UMaine system spend, which is the bars, versus the line of other higher public ed institutions decreases. So the gap gets smaller. However, to reach that peer average for fiscal year 20, an additional $10.8 million was needed. So this graph is looking at the cyclical nature of buildings and their components, and how it's predictable when life cycles will be coming due and what it takes to keep up with them for replacement. Considering this, keeping up fully with everything would require an investment at that top dotted line, which is $64 million for fiscal year 20. However, at Gordian, we discount that concept for such reasons as strong planned maintenance practices to extend those life cycles, understanding that not all buildings are created equal, and that every campus has a different tolerance for charm, if you will. And then the notion of functional obsolescence driving investment decisions rather than replacement cycles. The baseline investment for keeping up across the UMaine system for fiscal year 20 was $40 million, $40.1 million. This is really to keep campus status quo. And it's with the understanding that all of those dollars were spent strategically in the right places with the right priorities. If the investments are not meeting that target, we call this unintentional deferral, and will drive an increase to the backlog. And so when we compare this target to your investment level, you'll note that the investments are not meeting this target. And so additional deferral to the backlog was taking place not only in fiscal year 20, but since fiscal year 13. And so looking here at the asset reinvestment need or backlog, we do see a growing trend within the UMaine system. This is on a dollar per square foot basis. And for fiscal year 20, the UMaine system reached $153 per gross square foot. For fiscal year 20, that's on par with other higher ed public institutions. But you can see that the UMaine system has been growing over time consistently at a faster rate than what we've seen within those other higher ed public institutions. diving a little bit further into this need, this is looking at two different pie charts. The pie chart on the left is the distribution of historical project investment from 2006 to 2020, broken down between envelope, mechanical, and interiors. The pie chart on the right, however, is the distribution of system need by those same categories. And you can see the past investment really has focused on that mechanical need. And that's a great story. And then looking forward, the need, the greatest portion of need still falls within that mechanical category. And so you think about the conversations around COVID, air exchanges, HVAC needs, that's an important area to focus on, not only today, but moving forward, and really key to keeping buildings functioning as you would like to have programs and different staff operate appropriately within those spaces. And just something to think about moving forward. This is, we mentioned this earlier on, but this is a graph. The dark blue area represents the construction age of all the buildings within the UMaine system portfolio. You can see the two big historical spikes in construction. This happened across the industry, but also has a similar trend for the UMaine campuses. But those two waves of work bring life cycles, right? As the buildings were constructed, each of those building components now have life cycle needs moving forward. And as they start to stack up on each other, the old buildings need help as they reach that second wave of life cycles coming due. And then the buildings that people think are relatively new because they were built within this century are hitting the life cycles for the very first time. And so you have the second wave of the oldest buildings and the first wave of the newest buildings competing for the same financial funding. Looking at net asset value, this is really the percent good of the UMaine system portfolio. As mentioned earlier, the UMaine system is not meeting that annual target need of $41 million, and that ultimately leads to increased deferral and lowering of the net asset value of the system portfolio. The interim goal was set with the work of you all to 63.5%. In fiscal year 20, the UMaine system net asset value is 53.5. And so there is a growing gap of that interim goal at 63.5% and what the actual NAV is for the UMaine system. And so there was a slight decrease from fiscal year 19 to 20 with that gap of investment from the target. Something important to note is that the net asset values do vary by campus. UMA actually exceeds that Board of Trustees interim goal, where the other campuses are falling below that interim goal, UMaine being the lowest portfolio. So just some simple takeaways before the discussion. $1.3 billion of need exists within the UMaine system portfolio, and the baseline investment level to keep up with the need coming due each year is $41 million. And this baseline will continue to grow over time. The current financial crisis is potentially providing a framework to make changes that have been evident for some time, and understanding that the trends of the past are likely to shift over the next few years. Some of those shifts will have positive impacts. Some of those shifts might have more negative consequences, and there's still a lot of uncertainty of what the future brings. But just highlighting here, campuses in the system are continuing to age, and life cycles are coming due will require a large influx of capital to address the highest priority needs. $50 to $60 million at minimum will begin to slow the aging process. A larger influx of capital will really be able to address the highest priority needs. And it's important to understand the availability of potentially new funding sources, such as federal stimulus dollars. There's an opportunity to improve customer satisfaction and reporting through the work order system that I talked about earlier, being able to tie the operational costs to capital needs and being able to communicate that to those outside of facilities and to this group will be important. And then just understanding that campuses will shift post-pandemic and understanding what's the space management plan. Acknowledge that campus density will look differently moving forward, and understanding important strategies to re-image the space usage, right-size campus, and hopefully ultimately reduce cost. So some campuses are toying around with a building portfolio labeled post-pandemic space reassessment. So what potential buildings could be removed if there's new utilization metrics coming out with that new density of campus. There is additional operational needs and new expectations around cleaning and HVAC standards. And those conversations are probably not going to go away in the near future. And it's also important to understand and begin the conversations now about what the fall 2020 or fall 2021 might look like, and the implications of academic spaces if all students return, yet some of the public health guidelines will remain in place. And so again, that concept of space management and what the campuses will look like moving forward to meet the health standards as well as the campus needs will be important to understand. So a lot of information very quickly. Are there questions and comments from the group?
Thank you, Emily. Are there any questions?
I had a little question on the original report. In the chart 40, the maintenance, there's a couple of charts that suggest that, I read it to say that we have more administrative overhead than we need, than we need.
I can address that, Trustee Riley. It's a persistent factor in the Sightlines report, primarily because we have more working supervisors than is typical in some of the facilities areas. So what gets classified as a supervisor in our universe is actually a working supervisor, and that throws a few of those numbers off a little bit. That said, Sightlines has recently committed to taking another look at those numbers, and Stuart Harvey has been with you this morning as part of that process to make sure that we really untangle that and make sure we get those numbers as accurate as possible so that the benchmarking does what benchmarking is supposed to do. But the primary issue at the moment is the classification of working supervisors.
Thank you. We got to look for every penny, every place we can find it. So can I just follow up, Mr. Chair?
Please, Trustee Riley.
I'm struck by this report and the notion that we need $50 to $60 million each year to deal with the deferred maintenance and the long list of buildings that are potentially renovatable. And I think it reinforces Emily's earlier point for the humane study work to really look at the existing dormitories, most of which appear to be on the list as potentially renovatable, if that's a word. But it also strikes me that this report drives home for me the importance of a system-wide capital plan, and I know it's in the works, to help the board sort of make judgments. Where do we invest limited dollars? How much should be in deferred? How much should be in new opportunities? What do we do when some of it's grant-driven and others we will never get grants for? Seems to me there's a bigger conversation to have, and I'm really pleased that we have that on the agenda.
Thank you, Trustee Riley. Trustee Gardner?
Yeah, excellent report. I do have a question though, and I'm trying to remember. I think I've asked this question a couple of times over the years. And how does long-term leases or third-party buildings, if we had some or we will be building some, let's say in the future if we did, how do they factor into this? Does that come off the list or does it go on? And I'm just curious, and whether other systems that we're comparing to, are some of their facilities leased out, and would they show up on in their database? I'm just wondering how that, if it's apples to apples here.
Yep, typically we do not include those buildings.
Okay, because some of the accounting rules are starting to change or have changed in terms of how people have to think about long-term leases. So, but from a maintenance standpoint, it's going to be different, I'm sure.
Right, and that's kind of the key component we look at. There's a few one-offs that we might include, but I think generally across the board, we can pretty confidently say they're just not included within our analysis for UMaine or any of the peers.
So just so I'm clear, so for example, somebody came along and said, well, I'll buy your dormitories on campus XYZ, which is maybe unlikely, but it's theoretical here. And then we lease them back, they would come off this.
Right, if the person buying them was then responsible for all the maintenance and capital needs moving forward, they would come off this list.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions of the trustees? Trustee Kane?
Thank you. This definitely does speak to some of the less sexy things I was talking about earlier, and puts a lot of it in perspective. What I'm struck by, and it's not totally fair to President Franny Mundy, because any of the campuses could have presented before we saw this report with what their investments are and the opportunities. And I think what strikes me is the role of the important, but also tricky role of external investment in decisions about campus capital improvement and investment. Because on one hand, it is undeniably awesome and exciting about all of the things that are happening across the system that are driven by external investment, and whether that's grants or private donations. But those things are so rarely ever, basically never, going to attack this this non-sexy list, right? And I think for what this really drives home for me is the need for the board to think about wrapping our arms around what we do about this, right? With that reality that the external grant funds are not going to be there for this. Is it partially making the case to our elected officials, or is it making the case just to ourselves that we have to prioritize this? Because I'm really struck by also in this post-COVID world where we don't even know what necessarily the guidelines will be for if they're going to change for things like residence halls or common spaces. As we emerge from this pandemic, it just drives home the point for me that we have to be even more deliberate about not just the assessment of the need, but how we can't allow ourselves to be overwhelmed by the magnitude of it, I think is my point, because any progress would be helpful across all of the campuses. So it's not really a question, it's more of a comment. It's an excellent presentation. It's a really important analysis, but taken in total with the other presentations from today, it's a reminder that we have to do this too. So, thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Kane. Any other questions or comments? I would just throw out a couple of things that I'm right there with you, Trustee Kane. That the first time I saw this report, I was completely overwhelmed on the size and scale of the other part of our job that's out there. And so it always weighs on my mind when we're looking at a new expenditure. I will say that the new facility, the use of real estate committees that I've seen the work they've gone through do keep this in mind. And I have seen, like with the art museum discussion, there was real discussion on what could we do, what could we not do, and how did it work its way through. And when George Kinghorn made his presentation with President Franny Mundy, they really did very much weigh in on what the future costs would be. And it was a thoughtful presentation. And I see that frequently out of Chip and team. But it's how do we tackle that, which is already on the list. We're doing, I think, a decent job of not adding to it, but tackling what's there is a big job. So that was not my question, either my commentary as well. Any other questions, comments? All right. Emily, thank you very much. And Chip, thank you. Next up, we have tab 8, Housing and Public-Private Partnership, the P3, with UMaine Farmington and UMaine Presque Isle. This presenting to us is UMaine Farmington President, Ed Serena, and UMaine Presque Isle President, Ray Rice. Good morning.
Morning, Mr. Chair. I believe I'm leading off and President Cerno is following me both of us with some brief remarks. First, I would say I think the timing for this presentation following the questions of Trustee Kane about the unsexy things that need to be addressed couldn't be better than what you're seeing here, because this really addresses a number of unsexy matters that are absolutely essential for the continued long-term well-being of these two campuses. So I want to thank Brailsford and Dunleavy for the great work they've done for our two campuses too. And just know that this is truly an exceptional opportunity that I did not expect to see in my tenure as president here at UMPI, to really meet the needs of our students and their expectations as captured by surveys that were administered both pre-COVID and just a month ago. So you're almost getting lifetime feedback from our students that will help to recapture students we currently lose to external housing environments, markets, that will provide a significant positive impact to our institutional's net asset values, including a sort of domino effect it will have in our ability at both of our institutions to remove facilities that are lowest in that regard, to increase the net cash flow of our institutions while funding crucial deferred maintenance, and that this will positively impact our composite financial indexes in the long term. For UMPI, this allows us to enhance our strategic value by providing students the type of housing that they are asking for, and frankly, that our residence hall students, regardless of what institution they are at in the system, really expect today. And a quality of housing experience that will exceed the quality that they generally find in our geographic market area here in Presque Isle. Bringing all of our residents back to our campus and thus removing students from old Air Force Base housing, which is some 2 miles distance, to repurpose existing facilities that will maximize our ability, following our master plan, to provide office and meeting space for faculty, staff, and students, removing them from facilities that are significant drags on our net asset value, as I noted, and provide ourselves flexibility to meeting future enrollment projections, all of which will result in a net asset value of our housing system that virtually will double within a 6-year span. And I'll turn it over to President Serna for some remarks.
Well, thank you, President Rice, and good morning, everyone. I know we're short on time, but I do want to emphasize one thing that Ray mentioned, and that is, and this is especially acute here in Farmington, is the competition for student housing. And the fact that we are at a competitive disadvantage in a lot of ways, because at least at Farmington, our housing stock includes a lot of outdated floor plans that just have lost track and fallen out of favor with the market. And students are voting with their feet and simply leaving campus because we're not offering the amenities that they are looking for. So what makes this just such a compelling project for me is it really offers a style of housing that we know our students want. And that could be a game changer here in Farmington and really just improve our competitive position to keep the students on campus, which we know is so important. And with that, I believe I am handing off to Lori.
Yes, you are. Thank you so much. We'll go through these slides quickly and leave some time at the end for questions. So with the help of Brailsford and Dunleavy, both UMPI and UMF have developed reinvestment plans to address the key challenges within our respective housing systems. We're looking for informal FFT approval to begin the solicitation process for a P3 partner in the development of replacement student housing facilities on each of our campuses. So we actually have shared challenges. We've got significant deferred maintenance needs, low current housing systems or NAVs, inability to generate sufficient cash flow to fund deferred maintenance and renovations. And without a strategic investment plan, UMPI and UMF are at the risk of our housing facilities and financials deteriorating to an unrecoverable state. Some of the key outcomes that we need to keep in mind is the reinvestment strategy must generate positive cash flow to fund future necessary deferred maintenance and reinvestments and enhance the strategic value of the residential experience at both of our campuses. So both campuses, as President Rice said, surveyed students back in January of 2020 and again in January of 2021 to understand the impact of the pandemic that the pandemic has had on our student demand for on-campus housing and incorporate any prudent occupancy risk mitigation strategies into the reinvestment plans. Something to keep in mind is a national context of the pandemic impact on student housing. So the student perception of value of the residential experience, overall, there's been no material reduction in the student housing capture rate, which is the percentage of target market students living on campus due to the pandemic. But students that valued the residential experience prior to the pandemic typically report that the pandemic has not significantly changed their views or future housing behaviors. But there is a potential for a lost class. There's been some fluctuation in the perception of the value of the residential experience among different class levels. Upper division students have seen the value of campus life and are eager to return. First year students have not had this experience and are at risk of being lost from our campus housing. So emphasis should be placed on supporting a high value residential experience for those students during the first year of return to in-public instruction. The pandemic significantly has reduced revenues for campus auxiliaries. And nationally, many campuses are struggling to amass resources to reinvest in facilities maintenance needs. I'm going to now turn this over to Debbie Rourke, the Executive Director for University Advancement and External Affairs at UMPI.
Thank you, Lori, and good morning, Chair Donnelly and trustees. Specifically related to UMPI, our reinvestment strategy must minimize deferred maintenance costs and improve the system-wide net asset value in the most strategic and financially beneficial way, thereby ensuring the housing system's cash flow remains positive and can therefore support future reinvestment housing projects, plus provide us the ability to leverage bed counts of our existing halls based on future enrollment trends and student housing demands. Next slide, Lori, please. Demand for on-campus housing at UMPI actually decreased a little since 2019-20 due to the decline in the enrollment of housing target market students, degree-seeking undergraduate students, and not those enrolled in our fully online YourPace program. The decreases stem more from the scale of the target market through enrollment declines and not from the demographic shift in the target market towards subpopulations with a lower propensity to live on campus, such as your adult learners. Pre-pandemic, UMPI was actually witnessing increases in target market enrollments, and we anticipate this trend to continue post-pandemic. As we attract more out-of-state and the more traditionally aged students, we will see that increase in demand for student housing on campus, especially with highly desired unit structures such as semi-suite and full suite styles. This is exactly what the students are looking for that we cannot provide today. The pandemic experience did not significantly impact the perception of the value of on-campus housing among our target markets. Therefore, a rebound in the target market enrollment would most likely result in a subsequent rebound of demand for on-campus housing. On the recent reconfirmation survey conducted at the start of this semester that Lori and President Rice spoke about, for UMPI, 85% of the students reported that their experience during the pandemic has not impacted their decision to live, where to live post-pandemic. So we anticipate the return to an on-campus residential experience post-pandemic. Next slide, Lori. UMPI's reinvestment strategy is phased and starts with the replacement of one existing hall, Merriman Hall, with a new student housing development that will contain between 200 and 220 beds in a 2-bedroom semi-suite or full suite units. This will immediately eliminate $3 million in deferred maintenance costs and capture new markets, thus new revenues, in on-campus housing by providing in-demand unit types. Additionally, with reinvestment funds, we'll be able to move forward with plans to renovate Emerson Hall. Park Hall will be reserved and serves as our flex point in a couple of years post-pandemic, such that if demand for increased beds is expected, we'd be able to pivot and renovate Park Hall as well for student housing. Our Skyway suites will be repurposed to service faculty and staff rental housing, supporting new arrivals to campus, for example, and coaches who live locally for 9 months of the year. Regarding the local community impact, the multi-housing family market in Presque Isle is extremely tight, and new residents are struggling to find a place to live when they arrive, as there are very few quality rental options near UMPI for young professionals. So by attracting students back to campus and our housing, more housing options may become available to our local community. So it's a real win-win all the way around for the Presque Isle area. Next slide, please. In beginning the reinvestment plan with the delivery of a new P3 housing project, UMPI can generate new revenue needed to support other housing reinvestment projects with minimal support, minimal upfront investment by the campus or the University of Maine system to mitigate any enrollment-related occupancy risk while maintaining the ability to meet future demands. The housing reinvestment plan allows for bed count flexibility in the renovation of Emerson and reservation of Park Hall to bring it back online to support that additional housing need. Next slide. The completion of the housing reinvestment strategy will result in short-term revenue generations and long-term housing system net asset value recoveries. We would eliminate immediately $3 million in deferred maintenance with the removal of Merriman Hall. We would increase our housing system net asset value, as President Rice mentioned, from 45% in 2019 to a projected 86% in 2025 at the conclusion of the construction and renovation projects. With that, I'll turn the program over to Christine Wilson, Vice President for Student Affairs and Enrollment Management at the University of Maine at Farmington.
Thank you, Debbie. Much of the information in our reinvestment strategy is similar to UMPI's. We are very interested in enhancing the strategic value of our residential experience. We know that for the housing options that we have for students that are part of the reinvestment plan, we don't have any trouble filling those beds. We just need a better balance of first-year housing and the kinds of housing that our upper division students would like. So the point of our strategic requirements are to have a housing reinvestment plan that generates new revenue and enhances our housing system's operational and physical efficiency to support the necessary renovation of other housing stock and maintenance projects that will improve the value and condition of all of our student housing assets. We're really looking to have a high value on-campus housing experience. It's an important part of our strategic plan, which is almost finalized. And we've got to be able to respond to the demand for the decline in demand for our on-campus housing, enrollment decline, and demographic shifts, and the impact of the pandemic on our student experience of living on campus. This was a big difference for us in the last survey and our COVID survey, that there has been a decline in students' perceptions of their experience given COVID. We have heard from them that they're anxious to come back to campus, but we do need to have the kinds of housing that they would like. Next slide, Lori. So our plan starts with replacing 2 of our older halls with a townhouse style apartment community. I mentioned earlier that in our current housing stock where we have singles and suites, those fill up very quickly. So this would add to the kind of housing that is most desirable in our current housing stock and what students are choosing when they move off campus. So we would replace 2 halls with townhouse style apartment community, which then in turn we would be able to renovate Mallet and Purington, which are our 2 historical halls on campus, both over 100 years old now, and then to renovate our some of our other housing on campus. And some of those, Scott North and Scott South, have some places inside that to renovate them, we could create more suite style housing, which again is the kind of housing that our students like. In terms of the local community impact, the off-campus housing market in Farmington, as you've heard before, is very competitive for us. It's convenient, it's highly affordable, and it's very student friendly. So perhaps a welcome side effect of our housing reinvestment strategy and attracting students back to campus is the encouragement of local property owners to improve the physical quality of their housing in order to compete. So again, much of this is similar to UMPI's reinvestment strategy. A key point for us is that in the beginning of the reinvestment plan, with the delivery of the P3 townhouse project, UMF will generate new revenue needed to support the other housing reinvestments projects mentioned on the earlier slide, with minimal upfront investment by the campus or the system to mitigate any enrollment-related occupancy risk while maintaining the ability to meet future demand. The housing reinvestment project allows for bed count flexibility in the renovation of those secondary projects, Mallet and Purrington Halls. We know we must maintain a minimum of 915 occupied beds to generate positive cash flow throughout the reinvestment plan. So just to summarize, the new student housing development will result in short-term elimination of $8.7 million in deferred maintenance costs, new revenue generation, and long-term recovery of housing system net asset value. And Lori, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Just quickly to wrap up, bundling Presque Isle Farmington opportunities is intended to attract a wider range of national housing developers. And we must begin our housing reinvestment strategy now. It's going to make us more attractive to potential development partners and achieve efficiency in process, time, and costs. So the project delivery timeline, to meet the ideal opening date of fall of 2023, we must begin the solicitation of a development partner in the spring of 2021. So we are asking for informal approval to go ahead with a RFQ for to seek approval for preferred vendor. As I mentioned, we have an aggressive timeline, and we are targeting to conclude the solicitation process by the May 23rd, 24th BOT meeting. And then we plan to share our preferred partner recommendation as we seek approval to begin formal negotiations. To achieve this target, we must initiate the solicitation process with the release of the RFQ immediately. So that wraps up our presentation, and open to questions.
Thank you both for, or all four of you, for an excellent presentation. I think when we think of collaboration and what the University of Maine system ought to be doing going forward, having these two campuses that are geographically very far apart coordinate to tackle issues that are on both campuses is really a great example for the rest of the system on collaboration and maximizing the opportunities we have. So I just want to, once again, give you guys a big kudos to you for thinking this through and collaborating on bringing this forward to us. And I will say on the side, I spent 2 years at Merriman Hall, so I'm a little bit sad to see it go, but as my wife reminded me this morning, that was 30 years ago. So any questions or other comments? All right, seeing none, thank you for an excellent presentation. And next up, we have tab 9, review of IT projects with a value of $250,000 or greater, with the very fast talking and talented Chief Information Officer, David Demers.
Thank you, Chair Donnelly. I don't know if I can do negative time, but I will do my best to get this wrapped up pretty quickly here. Let me close this, make sure I can see my screen. All right, can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay. There we go. Very good. So I'm going to go quickly through this. There are a couple of high points I do want to touch on. Some of the work that has been reported on in the past remains sort of status quo as priorities have shifted a little bit and funding has sort of stalled, and COVID has also hit us. For the Classrooms of the Future project, we remain at 99% complete. In terms of where we still have work to do, primarily it's at UMA, and this is due to the fact that we have reinvested contingency funds that were set aside in case we had any overages. We're reinvesting those in some of these facilities. So UMA is on the deck in terms of how figuring out how we're going to use those contingency funds, also supplemented by REST grant funds that were received in 2019 to update several more rooms. So we're going to schedule that for the summer. So that is going to leave this project open a little longer than we would have liked, but it's for a good reason because we are getting more rooms upgraded. In terms of REST grant, this is a new slide that wasn't in your deck, but I felt it was appropriate to add. We did receive word last week that the University of Maine system received a $1 million USDA REST grant. This was a grant proposal titled 21st Century Connections, Meeting Higher Ed, Healthcare, and Workforce Challenges in Rural Maine. This is primarily to expand and shore up the infrastructure to deliver telehealth and telecounseling services in rural areas of the state. So this was a partnership with several campuses across the system in collaboration with various healthcare providers listed here, really working to identify several locations, 42 in total across the state, where we will be investing in and improving web conferencing capabilities and promote telemedicine service and remote patient exam sites. So we're very pleased that we received this funding, and we will start to work on getting the plan in place to make these investments over the next several weeks. But we were very pleased to see this. And part of the reason why I wanted to mention this in context of Classrooms for the Future is without that initial investment, we would have never had an opportunity to seek these funds. So it was a critical investment and just an expression of gratitude to the board for supporting the Classrooms for the Future project. In addition to that, we had our web conferencing upgrades, and this was the $2.6 million investment in getting classrooms prepared for teaching in a remote modality. So we are at 93% completion at this point in time. You can see the chart in terms of where we are on each campus. The winter break work that had been scheduled is mostly complete. We're reassessing some work, and there again with some contingency funds and some savings that were realized via bulk purchases, we are being able to go back and actually schedule some additional rooms that will be completed at the end of the spring semester. So again, all good news on that front. On the wireless infrastructure side of things, we're still at 99% completion. Some of the same things hold true here. USM remains our biggest piece of the pie to wrap up in terms of overall completion. That stated, we have wrapped up work at Augusta, Farmington, Fort Kent, Machias, and Presque Isle. We are doing some punch list item work at the University of Maine. Work is still underway at the University of Southern Maine. We recently wrapped up work in Costello Hall, but we're focusing on LAC and Sullivan Gym right now. Once we wrap up those sites, then this project will be closed out, and we hope to be able to make that happen over the summer. For the Main Street Improvements Project, we are marching toward completion on this. You'll recall that this is really providing an interface that demystifies the PeopleSoft Main Street environment for end users, students in particular, just making it much more mobile friendly and accessible for them. The biggest item to note here is January 4th, we officially launched the new Main Street Experience pilot program at the University of Maine at Machias. So they are actively using the platform right now, and we are actually receiving feedback from those students, and that will inform how we roll this out for the broader audience coming up in the fall. So this is going to be a great tool just to make the system easier to use without necessarily changing the underlying infrastructure for the Main Street environment. Voice over IP implementation. These are the 3 campuses that we still are working to get cut over to the voice over IP system. You might recall last time at Farmington, we did suggest or indicate that there was a cheers in the street when we finally turned off their legacy Avaya system. This project is not yet closed out because we still have to account for ripping that system out and doing something with it. I'm advocating for having a bonfire, but that hasn't been met with approval by the campus. So we have a little bit of work to do on the e-waste disposal and some additional infrastructure planning at Farmington, but we expect that one will be wrapped up shortly. At Presque Isle, we did complete cabling in South Hall and Campus Center, and we're marching away with the plan to deliver IP phones in those facilities and decommissioning the old legacy system sometime later this spring semester. And at USM, we had some individuals on the team that were unavailable to do work over the winter break. So things slowed down a little more than anticipated, but we do hope to be able to kick things back up over the next few months. This one also, last time I reported, we did successfully complete our migration to the Brightspace Learning Management System. So in May, at the next FFT meeting, I will be bringing that final project closeout report to you. So nothing to report on that one at this time. The ERP assessment work, this is really to set us up for success with the unified accreditation effort and the changes necessary in the Main Street environment. We did engage with an external consultant, Huron, to really take a deep dive into our HR, finance, admissions, and student records areas to identify opportunities for making changes that will support unified accreditation and make the system much easier to use for everyone, creating some efficiency gains and process improvements across the board. The report from Huron has been delivered. There is a price tag associated with it. So the key challenge that we're facing right now is coming up with a viable funding plan. And I'm working directly with Vice Chancellor Lowe on this. And once we have a modicum of a plan that might be somewhat affordable, we plan to bring this back to FFT and the full board for approval on the plan for helping to make these changes. The last item is going to be the Northern Ring optical equipment refresh. This is the $1.3 million investment to shore up the infrastructure to connect our northern sites. We are at 24% completion on that project. Notably, all the equipment has been ordered. Site surveys are done for just about all of the sites. There's some pending electrical upgrades and installation of power supply backup units for 2 of those sites, but we're ready to actually commence with work. So within the next week here, the contractor will actually begin scheduling and doing the installations in those sites. And we expect that this one, again, will be wrapped up before we hit the summer. The winter weather is going to be the biggest variable on this one. And seeing the events of the earlier this week, we know that that's going to continue to be a challenge. And that is as fast as I can get through that report. And I will consider it that I was batting cleanup and not scheduled in the 9-hole, Chair Donnelly.
Thank you, David. And you would have saved us 4 minutes had we been, so you still did more than your job at batting cleanup. So thank you for bringing us home with a great report and some really good news. Any questions for Dave Demers? Seeing none. Any other items to become before the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee at this time? Seeing none. Ellen, do we need a formal vote or are we just done?
No, we can just adjourn.
Excellent. So thank you everybody for a fact-filled meeting. Great questions. Have a great day.